Hey, welcome to today's show. This is Rudy Rodriguez, the host of the High Profit Event Show, and we have a very special guest today, actually a dear friend of mine, Dr. T. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rudy. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. And you and I met through another mutual friend of ours, Rohan Seth, CEO of Grow Rev. And I just knew when I met you right away, you and Amanda, your significant other, that you guys were salt of the earth people. Like you're at this high level mastermind event, but you were there really looking to serve and make a difference for others. And I just knew, man, I had to get to know you and what you do. And I've been just so impressed. And I'm grateful that you're on the show today to be able to share with our guests your experience with events. And you've done, gosh, over 30 3-day virtual summits or so over the last 3 or 4
Yeah.
years. And you've done summits with as much as like close to 1,000 people in attendance to your summits. And you've been speaking for 25 years, right? Which is remarkable. You've
I have.
appeared on CBS, Fox News, CT News Canada, Global News, Shape and Ebony Magazine. You've consulted some of the most powerful and influential CEOs and CFOs in the world. You developed the Aligned Performance Institute, which is dedicated to expanding human awareness and potential around the world. And you're the author of the acclaimed book, Chasing Success.
I am. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Rudy. This is gonna be a lot of fun.
Absolutely, Dr. T. So let's jump into some of the meat and potatoes. I know you and I want to make sure that this is like the most action packed, value packed 30-minute podcast possible for the guests.
Yep.
But one of the things that you own is the fact that you have on average 87% of people who attend your events that begin end, right? And by the way, as a note inside of that caveat, that's also including a mixed audience of paid attendees as well as free attendees. So roughly 40% of that audience is free attendees. And in my experience, free attendees typically their stick through rate is much, much lower than 87%. So I am really eager and excited to hear what you have to share with us today.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, we do well with that. We don't have the biggest events on the planet, but we have really high value events. That's our coup de grace, I guess you can call it.
Awesome, man. Well, maybe if you can share with us a little bit about, just give us a little runway for the audiences to gotch your journey into events and your formula that you've discovered on how to create this level of engagement. I think that'd
Yeah,
be really
absolutely.
cool.
I got into events. I've been speaking for a long time, and it's kind of what I've always done to build any business that I have as I speak. And I've enjoyed speaking. I've worked on my speaking. And so speaking has been something I've been doing for a long time. Keynote speaking, all this has been a part of my life for a very long time. But it wasn't just about keynote speaking. Being a keynote speaking speaker is great, but how do you make an impact? And we were doing live events, and then COVID hit right before COVID. Before anyone did a virtual event, we actually did a virtual event, believe it or not. Before Tony did his virtual event, we actually did a virtual event. We really did. And we had this little thing, and we got this ATEM mini, and we had one TV, and we took a camera and just said, let's do this thing on Zoom. And we figured it out and started it. And I learned a lot in that first event. And it wasn't a big event, but I learned a lot in it, and how the medium is different, how to talk to the camera is different, how to, a lot of times as speakers, we go up and say, oh, I know how to speak. I can speak. And here's a stage. But how do you speak to an audience when there's no feedback? How do you speak to an audience when there's nobody who's engaging with you? How do you dial them in? How do you pull them in? How do you get them to stay with you that whole time? That was a big trick. There were certain things. I've done a lot of TV over the years, and so I wasn't afraid of the camera, but how you entertain the camera was a completely different experience than the audience. So I really took that and I started working with that from just the talents perspective. And then there's, of course, those procedural things we'll talk about here too, that I really started to work on to help. I don't know what our first numbers were, but to help improve that over as time progressed.
Awesome, man. Wow, it's cool to know that you were one of the first to innovate onto the virtual event space before even Tony.
It was before Tony. Now, I don't know if I'm saying the first, but I'm just saying that I'm the first that I know of. That I do know.
Yeah, you're just like, let's grab a camera, let's figure it out.
That's what I did. Literally, I remember we had the event starting on Friday morning, and Thursday afternoon, we're figuring out what's this 8 to mini thing. And we called video guys and we're trying to figure it out. We're like, this is how you do a switcher. And it was a whole thing. Now, of course, we've invested lots of money into it. Got the whole studio, the whole setup now. But when it started, it was a camera, it was an 8 to mini box and a TV, and we went to work. It was great.
Really cool. I'd be curious to ask you that first event that you did, or maybe the first couple events. What were some like the mistakes that you made that not obviously now you're looking back, you're like, oh, that's a no brainer because you've learned that. It's always good to hear like what those initial counterintuitive things were for you. Um,
So I got a great one. So on the third day of the event, about 9:45 in the event, we lose Zoom. And I'm thinking, how on earth do we lose Zoom? Like, this doesn't make any sense, right? How do we lose Zoom? And there was nothing going on weather-wise in my community. There was nothing happening inside of this. And I thought, I didn't understand because we really rented like this abandoned building space where there was no heat. And I did the whole thing in the cold. Like my staff was all wearing coats. There was no, it was like we had the event a week to plan and we figured this whole thing out. And Zoom basically shut down because they had a tornado or a hurricane somewhere in North Carolina at the time. Lots of rain. And so Zoom goes down for several hours. I'm like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And so I pivoted as what we do, right? It was in the time of pivot, I pivoted again and I started like we had a Facebook group and we just sent a message and I started doing the seminar from the Facebook group. And when Zoom came back on, we got back on Zoom. And I found out through that process where people were looking, there were other Zoom knockoffs that were out there, other companies that do similar to Zoom. And so we learned contingencies were huge when you deal with technology. One of the biggest things we learned. So we actually, every time we do an event, we have Zoom, we have our normal Zoom, but we also have, you're going to ask me the name, but I don't remember what they are anymore, even because Zoom has upgraded itself. Obviously, it's much better than it was that back then. But we have two different softwares that are like Zoom, pretty much exactly Zoom on backup in case Zoom crashes. And we can literally forward everyone to this next version and just send a text out. Everyone go to this thing and they'll register for whatever and they'll get on board. We've never had to use it, but that contingency was bred out of that chaos.
Plan B and plan C.
That's right.
Yeah. You don't have to experience that one time, right? Yeah.
When you deal with technology and you're running your own events, it depends what kind of event you do. When you're running your own event, you don't know, right? There was another time that our upload speed had gotten super slow. Like, why is the upload speed gone so slow? Because Comcast came and did a bunch of work here and they did something to the line. And now we have to go and it's like, oh, why is my up speed so slow? So it was the technology wasn't working. So you just don't know when there's so many variables. That's the problem with technology and virtual events is there's so many variables that you're trying to play contingencies for. And especially when you have more of an operation versus just like like what we're doing right now, off computer, TV or laptop or something like that. So technology makes it more complicated. You have to prepare for it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a good helpful note. That was your first couple virtual events, and here fast forward 3-4 years, you've done about 30, and now your engagement is at on average 87%. I'd be just curious to hear, like, I don't know if you have a formula from beginning to end. Like, how do you think through your events and how you communicate, market, promote, fulfill, such that you have 87% of people engaged for 3 days, especially online, because with Zoom fatigue these days, that's a thing.
It's the thing. It's the thing. People are tired of it. But the thing is that I'll tell you one thing that several things. Let me just go. I'm just going to berate a bunch of different things and hopefully some of them stick for the listeners. Your cameraman is essential. Your cameraman has to know how to work the camera, how to zoom in. It can't be just, oh, I'm just going to take any camera person that just does or just goes back and forth. It's not about that. It's about really working the camera. And so you got to have a cameraman that understands it. They're an essential component. You have a dance with that cameraman. That's so important to bring the audience together, bring them to life. I study TV shows. And what we do, one of the things that we do is that if you look at a TV show, they typically have a 7 to 10 second frame or an event. Maybe max it goes to 30 seconds. It's not going more than 30 seconds before it goes to another scene inside of it. But they'll keep one scene 7 to 10 seconds. And so one of the things that we do in our frames is we go 7 to 10 second frames. So different camera angles change every 7 to 10 seconds. So that's one of the ways that people don't get bored. Instead of just like a talking head, you've got something that's engaging and changing the screens at all times. So the TV feels different for them at Zoom. Because people don't just watch on Zoom. Many people will, especially if you're doing a 3-day event, you don't want to sit in front of a laptop. You project it onto your TV now, you're watching it on TV. Now you're a TV star. Everyone can be a TV star now. And those are two big things that I would say from the art side. Third thing I'd tell you that I really, I can't urge this enough because I've seen so many programs and I'm supposed to attend one this weekend. And if the presenter doesn't do this, it has a hard time keeping me on. If I would under deliver the content, And what I mean by that is this: is don't under deliver. Let me rephrase my statement. I don't want you to under deliver content. What I'm trying to say is connect with the audience with far more stories. Give far more stories inside of it. And when you give a story, you actually allow people to connect with you. But a lot of people in the speaking business, they don't realize that, you know what, let me just give content and content and content. It's more content. In the beginning, I wasn't as, and this is not, I learned this as time progressed, is that I was just dumping all the content I had in this event. Problem became is that they were already bored, they were already fatigued, they got over taught in that capacity, and people didn't want to stay. But the less content I taught, that was enough for them to learn and absorb. And the more I engaged, and the more I let my personality be open inside it, the greater the retention state. It's not about, believe it or not, it's much more about the performer than it is about the content. And that's so difficult for some of us who just want to, we have so much we want to share and teach. And we're also looking at it from a conversion standpoint, right? Like we're trying to convert. The greatest conversion factor is be likable, I think. Well, there's a bunch of ideas, different ideas that I found to be helpful in the art side of it for sure.
You mentioned the greatest conversion factor is to be likable. One quick comment I'll make on that is I often reference on the show the book Influence by Dr. Robert Cialdini. And there's 6 says weapons of influence, one of which is likability. People like people who are like they are or like the way they aspire to be. And if someone likes you, they're much more likely to engage and connect with you and ultimately become a client of yours. So I love how you just said the greatest conversion factor is be likable and allow your personality to be open instead of just trying to over teach.
In the beginning, we even like, I found I was wearing blazers. I like wearing blazers when I speak. It's just my thing. Some guys can wear just a jacket or a sweater, whatever makes you. For me, it's blazers. I love blazers when I speak. Without it, I feel naked without it. But even my blazers, the ones I was wearing in the beginning, were a little bit too hard on the on. And it was a factor that would turn people off. Like big shoulder pads. I've got big shoulder, relatively big shoulders as it is, but you put big shoulder pads on now, and like it feels too forced. And we went with much more of a casual blazer inside of it. And it made people much more open and receptive to soften my look. And that's something I didn't think about, but it played a factor. I think it played a factor.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for that. Shared 2 millimeter distinction there. It's just your clothing communicating more of a relaxed, likable, deep personality, right?
Yeah.
Which includes what we wear, not just what we say. And a quick note, other thing you said prior that I made a star on in my notes is changing that frame and having that relationship with the camera person who can keep that camera angle dynamic every 7 to 10 seconds, creating that experience for the attendees by changing the camera angle. That was great. I think that was a great nugget right there. I wanted to emphasize for our audience.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super important. If you don't do that, then what happens is it becomes a talking head. And I study this stuff, right? Like I love this stuff. I've been studying this stuff for a long time. I'm studying like how do TVs do it? If you notice like certain drama scenes, like right now I'm watching Suits. Have you ever seen Suits?
No, I've only seen the previews for it, but I actually
Yeah.
haven't
So
watched them
it's a
since.
show that like I've been watching, but you can see certain things, how they, at the end of the scene, they take the music up and how they bring applause and audience, music, and they use sound. And so we study all this stuff. We look at it. I have my team sit and say, okay, how do we make the event better? How do we use applause in it? And how do we get better at it? And transparently, like when other people are doing events, see what you like, what they do, right? See what the others are doing that are valuable inside of it and incorporate what works. And like we use dance in our thing. Like we use music, and dance is a big part of our energy inside of it, and keeping the community and the knowledge base up. Those are important things. I also think that it's important to not go more than an hour and 15 at a time. Going more than an hour and 15 on Zoom, it gets tiring. You may be able to go 2, 3 hours in a live audience, but when you do it on Zoom, it becomes a little bit tiring.
That's good.
That's been my experience, at least.
Yeah, same here. I do my best to keep it no more any segment on Zoom, no more than 90 minutes,
Yeah,
but ideally an hour segment, even
I
50
agree with that.
minutes. Yeah, that's cool, man. What else, man? You're like a mad scientist, you and your team in the background. You're like tweaking, studying, like all these little things. I'm super curious now. What are some of these discoveries, other discoveries that you guys have learned and put in place to create such great engagement?
Yeah, I think the other thing that we do the standard, send them their manual and stuff ahead of time. That's pretty standard. We do that. We didn't do it one time and we did find that our show rate was down. And that, so that was something we did do. We do a good job with my team to make sure that they're in the chat box or communicating. And something we do ahead of time that probably helps people is that we actually call every single attendee, personally call them and welcome them to the event. And it gives an added touch because we don't have the biggest events. We don't have 10,000 people that it's hard to call. Since we're under 1,000 for most part, at least at this point, we can call every person and have my team call and at least leave them a voicemail, nothing. And that's one of the things that they found is so appreciative is that they can connect with that. Then maybe when the numbers get bigger, that number goes down. It's either if the volume of the participants goes up more, maybe that number goes down a little bit. I don't know. I'm not there yet, but I would suspect that it may. But when we find that it's a huge component.
Hmm. Yeah. So you have your team call each participant. And what do they do when they call them? Do they just welcome them? Can you talk us through some of the
Yeah,
things
they just welcome them
these?
to the event. They welcome to them to the experience. They reframe what to expect on the weekend, and they let them know personally what the event is going to have, and then where to sit, how to prepare yourself, all that kind of stuff. And they're just grateful because you realize that like everyone at this point, the vast majority of the people that are going to be on your events have done a virtual event, right? It's not a new thing, right? But
Yeah.
what do you do to make yourself stand out different? How is your event going to be different than every other event under the sun? And when you got giants out there like Tony and Eric Worre and all these guys doing these massive events, how are you going to be different? How are you going to be unique inside that? And what we found is that what is our uniqueness? We found our uniqueness. Our size was our uniqueness. Therefore, our connection, our ability to connect was going to be a uniqueness factor. And so we take advantage of it because we can. And if we ever get to the point of doing events of 25,000 people inside of it or 10,000 people, then maybe it's a different element. But whatever situation you're in, I look at it and say, what's everyone else doing and what can we do differently that will help us connect to the audience better?
Yeah. I think that's a quality question right there. What is everyone else doing? And what can we do differently to help us connect their audience even better? Yeah. I'm making a note of that. I imagine as you ask yourself that question, you keep finding new ways to innovate and to improve connection and engagement with your audience.
We do. So we have a mandatory policy that after every event on the Tuesday after, pretty much the day after, 2 days after every event, we sit down with the entire team and we run through everything that we did well and everything that we did crap. And then the third question we always ask is how can we connect deeper? And that's a whole day meeting. It's just purely brainstorming. And the events team takes that back and sees what they can implement for the next event.
Wow. What I appreciate about that is that you do it with immediacy. So imagine you take a day off of rest for the event and then you do it while it's top of mind. And you don't just do it for 30 to 60 minutes. You said it's a whole day event. And you don't just ask what worked, what didn't work, but you ask specifically, how can we connect deeper? Right. So you ask that intentional question. I can see
I think
how
it's,
doing that consistently makes that difference. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's important, right? Like, look, we want to help people. We're doing these events because we want to serve people. We want to help people. And everyone that's doing it realizes that you found a medium in a way that you can actually help people. And you love to speak. You love doing the events. You love the whole thing. And you love the spotlight. It's great. All of us do. That's why we're in the business. That's why we're in the speaking business. Part of who we are. But how do we get more connected to them? Because if we don't connect to them, we don't help them. And if we don't help them, then they don't really change. And they go back saying, oh, that was a great event. Fantastic. I learned a little bit of information. Now what? And they go back to their old routine life. So our job, and then that's where conversion comes in kind of what you do in that world. It's like, how do we convert at that level? Then if you take that and say, if we're connecting better, our conversions are going to be better. We know this is 100% correlation inside of it. So if we're really looking to make a difference in the lives of the people of our audience, then I think that's probably the most important question we can ask on our debrief.
Yeah. That's great, man. Wow. That's really good. I'm curious to hear any other innovations that have come out of asking that question on your debrief.
I think there's been so many, honestly, like, I think if you just do it with your team, there's so many things that'll come out that'll be right for your audience. And here's the thing, like everyone tries to take a template of this, is what this person is doing, this, is what this person is doing and trying to, but I don't think that's the answer. I really don't think that's the answer. There's maybe some best practices, but then there's going to be best practices for your community because your community is going to be different than my community. And or anyone's community is going to be different based on the culture, the environment, what they expect, what you give. And your team is going to know that community. So I think that question opens up innovations that will become best practices for you to serve your community at the best. Depending if you have a bunch of males in your audience, you're going to have a different set of best practices than a bunch of females, right? Completely different. If you have a bunch of hairdressers versus a bunch of entrepreneurs, you're going to have a different set of personal development. They're completely different. And I think it's important to address that for them inside that. Because if you just do a generic best practices thing, I don't know that you really, what's the old saying? Care enough about your client to be able to serve them with care, something along that line. If you know them, then you'll be able to serve them at the highest level. That's what I believe. Innovation will show up when you ask that question for sure.
I love your emphasis, focus on not necessarily the answer, but the question and how the question leads to the answers. There's a story, and I'm paraphrasing here. Maybe you've heard this one as well. I believe it was Einstein that was, as a professor, he would administer an exam, I think at Princeton every year. And he never changed the questions.
Mhm.
And at one point, someone came up to him and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Like the students are catching on. They know it's the same questions every year." And he says, "Yes, the question doesn't change, but the answers do."
That's right. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. It's actually funny that you mentioned that because I went to visit Princeton on a college tour with my daughter and I saw the room, or at least the building where Einstein used to give the lectures. But I remember that story from that. It's absolutely true.
Oh, yeah. So you heard it. Okay.
Yep.
Very cool. Excellent, Dr. T. Oh, man, this has been really informative. And of everything you shared, just that one quality question, man, that's gold right there. I'm highlighting, bolding that, starring that. I'm using that, myself. I'm going to ask that question myself because I agree with you. If you can increase your connection and really care deeply for your clients and keep them engaged, connect, the conversion is a natural next thing that'll happen. And if you don't have that connection, then man, it's like pushing a boulder up a hill to try to convert someone into a client.
If you don't have that, you're fighting objection handling. It's objection, objection, objection. If you have the connection, then objections go away, it fades away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the trainers that I worked with for years, basically, he would say that sales trainers, he says 40% of the conversion equation is the trust, rapport, connection. And if you can get that right, your objections is like 5%, 10% tops.
I probably learned it from him at some point because I don't know if I'm smart enough to come up with that, but that's probably right. Yeah.
Awesome, Dr. T. Hey, if our audience would love to learn more about you and what you do, what would be the best place to send them?
Yeah, you go a couple places. Just go to my website, drrewire.com, or you can go to the Rewire Score, rewirescore.com. You can take a quiz and learn a little bit more about what I do and the brain, the function, how it works, and get more information from there as well.
Awesome. So that is rewirescore.com
Mhm.
for the quiz. And your website is drrewire.com. So we'll be sure to include those links in our show notes as well. Dr. T, as we wrap up here in our last couple minutes, do you have any final comments or recommendations or word of advice for people who want to have profitable events and have people have that kind of engagement that you have?
Yeah, if I was to say anything, is that I love events. I love doing events. Keep doing them. Keep perfecting them. And the other thing I'll tell you is make sure the event is what your event wants it to be. Make sure you want it to be what your event to be. I remember for a while I was chasing the big numbers in the event, but I wasn't able to. It's not about chasing those big numbers in the event. It's about using the event numbers that you have and then growing to the next level of number. That's what I figured out in my process. Because people could say, well, you can spend $1 million and fill it up. Okay, great. But are they going to be the right people? Is it going to be the right quality? All those questions that play. But I think if you're going to do events, go all in on them. I think they're amazing. I love every aspect of them. And make sure that the event is congruent to you 100%. If it's not congruent to you, the audience and the camera does not lie. You'll catch it.
Congruency. Absolutely. That is
Yeah.
key. Connection and congruency leads to
But those are
conversion.
the themes of today.
Yeah, I think that's the 3 C's: connection, right? That connection, congruency, and conversion.
There you go.
Sounds like could be the name of a good virtual event.
It could be.
Awesome, Dr. T. Hey, appreciate you being such a great guest on our show today. Send my best to Amanda and your family. And thank you again. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Reed. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.